Welcome to Selectica's Contract Management Webinar Series. My name is Eric Mott, Vice President of Social Business at Selectica, and I'll be your moderator today. This session is about creating strategic value from contract management. So let me introduce you to your speakers today. Andrew Bartles is Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. He is a member of Forrester's Business Technology Futures team, which serves CIOs and their business partners by predicting the long-term business impact of information technology. Andrew's research is focused on smart computing analytics and technology-driven business transformation. We also have Patrick Stakanis. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Selectica. Patrick has extensive experience in identifying and capitalizing on emerging trends in enterprise software process effectiveness and performance management and cloud computing services. Prior to joining Selectica, Patrick authored key industry research at Gartner and helped large enterprises with their go-to-market and operational strategies. Patrick is on Twitter at Patrick Stakanis. You can learn more about each speaker by connecting with them on various social channels like LinkedIn, or go to the blogs here, whether it's Forrester or Selectica.com. So I want to give you a little bit of context. For the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to cover really three main topic areas. We're going to articulate the strategic business value that enterprises create with contract lifecycle management strategies. We're going to cover CLM trends and insights based on new research from Forrester's Andrew Bartles and customer implementations via Selectica. And of course, the research I'm referring to is a new market overview that Andrew published back in September. And it's the first time he's covering it in a webinar with you today. We're also going to provide some recommendations for you to start immediately, but also in 2015 to reduce costs, mitigate risks, drive compliance, and increase revenues via your modern enterprise. And let me just finalize here my introduction with a little more context. So modern enterprises. We're all in modern enterprises, and of course we have some modern enterprise challenges. There's really four main buckets. It's speed of business. Right? Enterprises need to create faster results with less friction and very dynamic operating environments. There's also process efficiency. You're always trying to squeeze cost out and improve speed. And increasing amounts of info and unstructured data requires automation to manage cost and value. There's revenue leaks, lack of visibility in obligations, terms, rebates, intellectual property, etc. This all impacts revenue across core operations and systems. And increasing risks. Internal and external compliance management is an absolute requirement because the cost of non-compliance is extremely high. So with that, I'm going to take just a brief moment to pass over to Andrew.
Okay, well, thank you. As Eric mentioned, I'm a research analyst at Forrester. Well, he went into a number of things that I do cover. For reasons of time, he didn't mention that I've been covering what we call the e-purchasing software market and also what we call contract lifecycle management market for over a dozen years now. And I recently published a research report, a market overview of what we call the contract lifecycle management report, which you see referenced here. I want to start with what contract lifecycle management is. But before I do that, I also want to just reiterate something I'm sure is relevant to all of you, but it's often overlooked, which is the strategic importance of contracts in business. Any part of all parts of a company's relationship with other business customers, partners, or suppliers are governed by contracts. They're the heart of B2B business in every way, and becoming more and more important as contracts move from kind of static documents that govern a relationship to more dynamic, customized documents that are tuned for specific business relationships and cover not just the initial transaction, but all ongoing relationships. Because contracts have become more important in the life of business, contract lifecycle management, in turn, has become even more important to how business operates. When we talk about contract lifecycle management, we're talking about software that's designed to handle all stages of a contract's life cycle. Everything from the initial storing and repository of existing contracts, the creation and drafting and negotiation of new contracts, importing third-party contracts if that's the end result of a deal you do, that rather than using your paper, you're using a third party's paper or your counterparty's paper. But once the contract is in place, monitoring, managing it, making sure that it's being executed in the right ways to get the value from that contract. You're also looking to how can we optimize a contract? How can we make this contract work better? How can we identify things we want to improve when it comes time to renew or replace a contract? And of course, the last stage of the cycle is doing renewal, doing a new contract to replace the one that's in place. That's the life cycle of a CLM contract, so that covers all of that. Now, the question is, so why is it important? And we've identified in working with clients 5 sources of value. And these also turn out to be 5 stages of implementation. So the first source of value from the CLM product is the benefits that you have from having all of your contracts in an electronic repository that's accessible to anyone who's authorized who needs access to that. No more contracts in the filing cabinet. You have to call down legal and say, hey, can you pull that contract for company X? Now, if you need the contract information, and if you're a salesperson, if you're a purchasing officer, you can quickly go, you can look and see what it is, you can utilize it. And that has benefits around cutting the cost of finding contracts. It also has benefits in terms of making sure you don't miss a contract that's up for renewal, and therefore be locked into a bad contract or fail to replace it with a new contract. And the next stage of value comes to analysis reporting of contracts. That's things like identifying duplicates. Why do we have 3 contracts with the same company? How did that happen? How can we then bring that into one contract? What are conflicts we have between contracts? We've done one contract with customer A. We've done another contract with customer A, but with different pricing terms or payment terms. Why is that? Let's get that fixed. What are things that we have obligations that we should be getting from? Gee, we have an intellectual property contract. Are we actually getting the royalties we're supposed to be getting? What are the rights that we have? And also, what are contracts that are interconnected? Contract with company A that's involved in a project, then we also have a contract with company B that's also in the same project. Let's make sure we understand how those timing of the contracts, for example, are lined up in terms of that project so everything falls together. The third stage, and third source of value, is then automating the contract creation. This means providing 2 line of business people wizards and templates with appropriate controls on clauses and on terms, clauses define terms and conditions, that allow them to quickly assemble the appropriate contract for their business purpose, but with controls that make sure if there are language that needs to be in all contracts, that's not removed. If there are changes of contracts that need approval before they can be issued, that those approvals are sent to the right people and they sign off on that. And that at the end of the day, you have a contract that is fully in compliance with your policies, but can be created by and business users as they need to do so. This has big benefits for legal staff, because now they don't need to spend their time reviewing every single contract. They can then focus in on the contracts where there are, the system's identified deviations that need their attention. This can actually shrink by as much as 90% the amount of time that legal has to spend reviewing contracts. It makes easier, faster cycle times. If legal, you no longer have a situation where you have a contract that's stuck in legal for 2 weeks. Now the approvals can be done very quickly, and therefore contracts that you want to close this quarter can be closed this quarter and not have to drift off to the next quarter because they weren't done in time. And of course, on the sell side, that means faster acceleration of revenues, or on the buy side, can lead to faster realization of savings. The fourth stage of value comes from then integrating that transaction system into those contractual terms and conditions. If you have a contract, for example, that specifies that we should be getting the following discounts from a supplier, or that we should be getting the following level of service. Then the transaction systems that govern that, your purchase and order system, requisition system, can check to make sure that in fact that's happening. Or similarly on the sales side, that you can make sure that if you are receiving an incoming order, you can check to make sure that your response will be in compliance with that contract. And of course that has the benefits then of more complete and effective compliance with the contract benefits that you expect to receive on the buy side, the contractual commitments you have on the sell side. And lastly, it provides a set of tools for anybody responsible for managing that contract, for them to track it, manage it, a dashboard, in fact, that's going to tell them when, in fact, give them all the indicators of status of that contract that can then help them make sure they're getting full value from that. As I said, these are the 5 sources of value, but in many ways, it's also the 5 stages of implementation. And so companies typically work through these stages over a period of time in order to achieve the value of a CLM. There are at least 5 sets of stakeholders who will have a viewpoint on CLM. Of course, there's the General Counsel and Legal Department. There's the CFO. There's the Chief Purchasing Officer, Head of Sales, and the CIO. But each of these will look at the CLM product from different perspectives. From General Counsel's perspective, they're going to be looking at the contract repository. They're going to look at the contract reports and analysis. And above all, they're going to look at the contract creation, because that's where they're going to benefit. But they don't care so much about the other pieces, because they're more concerned with the contract once up until a point of completion. After that, it's the responsibility of other people. CFO is particularly interested around from the perspective of reports and analysis. The CFO wants to understand what our financial obligations might flow from our contracts, what revenues we should be expecting. CPO, of course, is very interested in the contract repository, so they can get access to contract. They're very interested in contract compliance, though, because a lot of their job revolves around how do we make sure we get the contractual benefits we expect to, and that comes both through automated contract compliance and also allowing their vendor management folks to be able to access and optimize that contract. The head of sales is very keen on contract creation, because if he or she can shorten that sales cycle, that means more revenues this quarter, really, really key to them. But also contract compliance, because they have to deliver that. And the CIO is kind of interested in this from the perspective of contract repository and contract optimization. So different stakeholders will look at this differently. And that has an impact in terms of what you should be prepared for around organizing the teams that you want to have for both contract vendor selection as well as implementation. You've got to make sure you address all these stakeholders in the appropriate way. So what do you look for in a contract solution? First of all, because the General Counsel will probably be involved, you want to make sure you have support for all kinds of contracts, not just buy-side or sell-side contracts. Now, there'll be exceptions. There are in some industries where it's only buy-side contracts that matter, let's say like in government perhaps, or maybe in education or healthcare. But in other industries, companies have both buy-side and sell-side contracts. And so the General Counsel is going to say, wait a minute, I want to make sure we have one tool our lawyers use, not 2 or 3. You want to have a pricing model that's going to be tied to users, and both the common users and the power users. Common users may be somebody on a sourcing team that needs to look at this particular sourcing. A contract results from a sourcing event, but nothing else. A power user may be someone who's using it regularly, and so you want to have a pricing model that ties to that. A Word document interface is going to be critical because this is what lawyers are used to living with, and in fact what employees are used to living with. They're familiar with Word, both lawyers and employees, and they like to see it be created in Word. They want to see it work in Word. So Word interface is critical, but of course it needs to then be able to break it down into terms and conditions so you can then use that for integration. Ultimately, you want to have a contract repository that you can tie to transaction systems for both purchasing and for order management. You want to have those contract analysis and reports we talked about. And the key issue, since not all your contracts are going to arise in the system, many are contracts that you're handed to you or legacy contracts in your existing systems, you want really good contract import tools and capabilities to deal with those third-party contracts or contracts that are legacy contracts. Let's look at some success factors for each of these. In terms of the repository and creating the repository, you want to have a triage plan for the existing contracts. Which are the ones that will be replaced in the next 3 to 6 months? Then those you wait until you come up for renewal, and you then create them in the new contract, and let the old ones go away. Which are the ones that are static and inactive? You can put that off to the future. They don't need it. You may only need them for repository. You don't have to worry about those immediately, but you would as the second or third phase. So the ones you really want to focus on, which are the ones that are active that won't be replaced, those are the ones you want to have a plan for importing those contracts into the system so they can be used. As I referred to earlier, you want to have tools for importing those existing contracts. That may involve scanning conversion services or other automated tools for bringing it in, but it also involves having tools that can go through quickly and easily and tag in those contracts the key terms and conditions you want to flag and you want to have broken out for when you might need them. Lastly, you want to look for user-friendly search tools that can search for both structured and unstructured data in the contract, and be able to search both the contracts and the attachments, because in many cases some of the key data, key information may actually not be in a contract. It may be an attachment, a pricing sheet, or some other historical part of this. In terms of the second success factor, you want to look for a vendor who can provide a good portfolio of existing out-of-the-box tools. You want to have tools that will help you on process time, contracting process time, cycle time analysis reports. You want compliance analysis reports. And you may want to have regulatory compliance reports that you can have out of the box. But of course, not all of the reports you may need will be out of the box. So you also want to have good tools for creating custom reports. You have wizards that your business users can use without coming to IT to generate reports that they may need. And there will be times you want to export that contract data into your BI tools, so you have the right capability to do that extraction of contract data into your BI systems. A third success factor is in the contract creation stage. As I've referred to earlier, both employees and lawyers will want to have the contracts in Word because that's what they're used to seeing. But before you get to that point, you need to have a library of approved language for terms and conditions that has been established by the legal department, with some guidance as to which terms and which conditions are needed in which contract scenarios. Then, with those guides in place, you want to create the wizards and the templates that will ask a series of questions or give prompts to business users to guide them to answer those questions that you need to determine in order to figure out what's the right contract form, the right contract structure, the right T's and C's we need to have for this contract in this condition. So it's going to take some time to create those scripts. You're going to test them with users. You're going to make sure they're intuitive and work, and that takes a bit of time. The other key thing you want to do is that you want to create and establish the right security controls and audits of all changes. You want to make sure that if the legal department says, hey, under no circumstances can this text be changed, then in fact it can't be changed. You want to make sure that if there are changes made, then the system logs who made them, when did they make them, where and what caused them to do that, and allow you to revert back to earlier versions if you find in the course of negotiation that, gee, the version we had 2 times ago is actually better than the one we've got right now. Can we go back to that and support that reversion? Around the 4th stage of integration, the key thing in a contract lifecycle product is that its structure is not to treat the contract as a whole document, but instead to treat it as discrete terms and conditions that can be disassembled back to their parts, so then the transactional systems that need that data can find it easily and then can draw upon that and be integrated into that repository to pull that data as it needs it. For buy-side contracts, you also want to look for interconnections, interchange points with e-sourcing tools. For example, an expiring contract that will then trigger a sourcing event, or sourcing events that may include the key contract elements so that you can get those issues up front established as opposed to having to do them after the negotiation stage. For sell side, look for the interchanges with sales proposals. For example, an expiring contract will trigger a new proposal. You want to add workflow for contract compliance issues, because there will be some that have to have human intervention. And you want to make sure the contract information is all up to date. It has an updated price list, updated product information, all that is pulled in, so you can in fact make sure that everything in the contract is up to date where it needs to be. One of the other reasons that companies do CLM is because it helps with risk management. And it helps in several ways. For example, in the repository, it can make sure that you avoid the risk of forgotten and misplaced contracts. It can avoid the risk of missing contract expirations. The reporting analysis can identify duplicate, conflicting, or interdependent contracts. And of course, help with Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. In terms of automatic contract creation, it makes sure you have the right controls in place to prevent unapproved terms and conditions being added to contracts. And as I said, can automate that contract review process so attorneys can spend their time on more critical issues than making sure that all the T's and C's are right. And through the integration of transaction system, it can automatically verify that all purchases are being done in compliance and can flag or even halt transactions that are out of compliance with the contract. As I mentioned earlier, contracts occur in all parts of the organization, both buy side and sell side. And you'll often find pressure to look at contracts within the purchasing process or look at contracts within the sales process. But there'll be key stakeholders, as we said, CFO, CIO, legal, who are going to say, let's look across all contracts. So where there will be scenario situations where you may want to get a CLM product that's specific to that buy process or selling process, most times, probably 9 out of 10, you want to get a CLM product that's going to be able to be used across all of the contracts, not just buy side or sell side. There's one other dimension of this, if you go to the next slide, which is to realize that contracts don't exist in isolation. Contracts are linked to many other applications. And one of the things to look for, therefore, is going to be a CLM product that may be tuned to, linked to, integrated with other applications that you may use. On the buy side, for example, sell side, looking for a CLM product that is linked to products for revenue management, or connecting between Salesforce automation tools and contracts, or between order management, or between configuration, pricing, quoting engines, or between proposal management. Those are all areas where you see CLM solutions that may link with others, or in some cases, vendors offer a combination of those. On the buy side, it's integration between buy side CLM and new invoicing, between buy side CLM and e-sourcing, between e-procurement, between project management, between risk management. So because contracts are so important and play such a big role, increasingly we're finding vendors and customers who are looking for a solution that have these pre-built, pre-connected between the CLM solution and these other applications that need the contract data. If you are looking at buying CLM, or if in the process of buying a CLM solution, you're in good company. We're finding both products, CLM products are growing rapidly. Buy-side CLM, or contracts that are purchased primarily for managing buy-side contracts, still dominate, but we're seeing increasing deployment and adoption for sell-side contracts. And that commonality of a product that supports both is increasingly becoming the common norm. But certainly, traditionally, it's been the buy side that's been the key driver of CLM, but increasingly it's the sell side, and that's why we look for solutions that support both of those. So to wrap this all up, and before I turn it over to Patrick, CLM solutions have real tangible benefits. There's simply no question that they are worth the money that you spend on them. Those benefits are both direct in terms of areas such as being able to do contracts faster, being able to minimize the time it spends to find and identify contracts, minimize the time it takes to create them. But there are also intangible benefits, or ones that are maybe hard to value. The benefits of making sure that you are not missing contractual obligations you need to make, or contractual benefits that you're supposed to get. The benefits of being able to shorten cycle time and book revenues earlier than you might otherwise do. So put it all together, and it's very easy to build a very strong, very compelling case for doing, for making the investment in a CLM solution. Look for a CLM product that will support both buy side and sell side. As I said, there are some exceptions where it makes sense to go with one because you're primarily a buy side industry, or it may be that you need primarily a certain buy side problem may be bigger or more important than sell side, or vice versa. But in general, you want one that supports both. However, having said that, You can then implement in stages. You may start with buy side for a year and then follow up with sell side the next year, or reverse the issue. A key issue, success factor here, is getting legal involved. Legal needs to be involved not only in the selection process, as I said, because if you don't involve them early, they will get involved later. You can count on that. So get them involved early, get them involved in the selection process. But once you get them committed to buying it, make sure they understand that their role is going to be critical in terms of creating that library of terms and conditions, as well as for defining the wizards and scripts and templates for contract creation, as well as the approval workflow and controls. Make sure they understand that by investing time in doing that, they will dramatically shorten the amount of time that they will have to do then in actually reviewing contracts afterwards. So it does take investment on the part of legal up front, but the benefits in terms of how much time they save how much time they spend to review contracts will shrink dramatically. And that's a real carrot to make sure they're involved. As I said, you will have existing contracts. So establish a triage policy. Which ones do we have to replace, we need to convert and pull in? Which of the ones will be replaced over time? And which of the ones we can put aside for now because they're just there, but they're not active. We don't have to worry too much about them. We need to pull them in at some point. Look for ways to link contracts to related activities. Buy-side contracts to sourcing, as we talked about, or sales side with sales proposal, or with revenue management, or CPQ. Plan for integration of contracts into transaction systems, but recognize that's going to be a big problem to deal with. That's not going to be the first thing you do. It may be something you do 18 months, 24 months into your implementation, because it's not an easy task, but you ultimately want to get there. And as I said, look for the linkages between CLM and the other applications, and use that as a variable as you're thinking about which CLM product you want to get. So with that, let me turn it over to Patrick.
Thank you very much, everybody, for in joining us today. Andrew, thank you very much for your insight on the whole concepts around contract lifecycle management and the kind of the transition that's occurring from buy side to sell side, and the kind of the culmination that are coming together. From an industry perspective, what we're seeing at Selectica is very consistent with what Andrew was talking about from Forrester's standpoint as far as other industry analysts, that the two are coming together. And we believe that the enterprise contract lifecycle management aspect of this, the two coming together, really is a new phenomenon that's happening in this industry, as well as the consolidation of strategic supplier management that's coming together as well. So we are an organization that's very focused around those two things. We are recognized as a SaaS leader and have won a number of awards in industry-leading capability. So we are very happy to be here today and happy to participate with Andrew. So thank you very much. So I'd like to take just a second to talk about how Selectica views the marketplace. And this is being driven, again, by much of the feedback we have received from the industry analysts, from Forrester for sure and other well-known analysts, as well as our customer base and prospect base as to what they're looking to buy in the marketplace and what they're looking to, the needs that they're trying to fulfill. So we see this from a strategic supplier management perspective, how there's both an upstream and downstream need. And of course, from the Office of the General Counsel, we're seeing a number of pieces of technology that they're buying, and then on the sales side as well, that connects contract lifecycle management to this whole process. And we believe that contracts are at the core of all of this, and they're a significant driver to provide insight, control of these business relationships across the enterprise. And of course, underpinning here is business intelligence, insights, analytics that really are the catch-all to be able to report on and drive contracting throughout the organization. So specifically, as we dial in closer to enterprise contract lifecycle management and talk about the insight and control of the business relationships that you have, this is the part that's really, really crucial, and it actually ties right back to what Andrew was saying a few minutes ago as it relates to the buy side and the sell side. In fact, we're seeing a lot of people that are using contract lifecycle management on the buy side, And what we found is that they're not using it in a standalone environment. On the buy side, it's typically tied to their strategic supplier management aspects. It's tied to spend. It's tied to supplier management. So that's nothing surprising there at all. As you go across the rest of the model and you look at from an industry perspective, other things like the life cycle side of understanding workflow and negotiation and authoring are all big pieces of this, but it gets bigger than that. It really is the linkage between the sell side and the buy side and how they come together, and then the metrics that are driven across the enterprise suite and being able to look at what I'm buying to fulfill a sell or a buy side, or what I'm to fulfill a sell side contract. So the whole concept around ECLM, or Enterprise Contract Lifecycle Management, really is about the bigger picture. It's not just about looking at contracts as an entity or as a repository, but it's understanding what's deep inside of those contracts as it relates to obligations and discounts and rebates. Again, stuff that Andrew covered here a few minutes ago that's critically tied towards the whole concept of ECLM. And again, the metrics that drive this are very, very important. Another thing that I want to talk about for just a minute here is that the term ECLM that gets thrown around quite a bit, and you'll see it more and more in Google searches and more in vendors that you talk to in the marketplace and customers, and we're hearing it a lot. And I know that Andrew's hearing it from Forrester inquiries, and other analysts are hearing it. But the key piece to understand, when you hear the term Enterprise Contract Lifecycle Management, that is not about capabilities or about a product. It really is about a strategy or a way of looking at running contracting inside your organization. And if you go back a number of years ago in the late 80s and early 90s, when ERP started getting thrown out there and SAP came into the fold and Oracle and so on, and enterprise resource planning was all about bringing the financials together with human resources and human resources together with the other aspects of the organization that drive a business from an operational level. Right behind that, not only 10 years later, CRM came into the fold. Customer relationship management was now looked at as we have contact management, we have opportunity management, we have the different aspects of managing a sales cycle or a marketing cycle that came together under the auspice of CRM. And now the same thing is happening with Enterprise Contract Lifecycle Management. The different aspects that were happening, the standalone in the buy side or the standalone on the sell side, and then the things that the legal environment was doing, or the Office of General Counsel, what they were doing specific to matters management and contracts and data that was involved around contracts is all disparate data. So really what's changing is that ECLM is being viewed as a strategy, not just, though, from the vendor's perspective, but from the perspective of the customer or the client that are really talking to the industry and talking to us as suppliers of functionality or technology or capabilities that support the aspects of Enterprise Contract Lifecycle Management. So, again, more about a strategy, but when you look at it, how you tie the integration of those technologies and functionalities together and then being able to report on it from a business metric standpoint. So as we look at now Enterprise Contract Lifecycle Management as an opportunity standpoint, and where the general counsel and where the CPO sits inside the business, so whether you're in purchasing, whether you're a legal counsel inside of your business, or whether you're a sales operations person, all of these things apply, right? The rules across the organization have now changed. Everybody needs to be business people first, right, and lawyers second, or purchasing people second, or sales ops second. And from a business standpoint, every aspect of what goes into that contract, from a reducing risk and compliance, potentially on the legal side, reducing cost on the procurement side, or increasing revenue on the sales and marketing side, all three come together. And in fact, we were at a conference yesterday with a couple hundred general counsels talking about these three topics specifically, and we heard from numerous general counsels that support the organization and how they have now crossed over and become advocates of the business, working very closely with procurement, that the CPO and the Chief Purchasing Officer and the General Counsel are now lockstep, that the CEO is now lockstep, that they're all working towards a common goal. And what this really talks about when you get the contracts is what's in that contract, right? What are the risks that the company has? What compliance opportunities are there inside it? What costs could be attributed to contracts that are linked with other contracts inside the organization, and as it rolls down to different pieces of information inside of those contracts? On the revenue side, when you do a deal with the customer, right, does that get signed and it get thrown into a file cabinet or into a repository as a PDF? Or do you really look at those pieces of information that are inside of that contract? What is the commitment that that customer has to you? And are you making sure that if you're a technology company that they're paying for the licenses that they're using, or if they're a steel manufacturer that is buying stuff from you, that they're buying enough of that steel to be able to take advantage of the discounts that were offered? So again, it's important that you look at the opportunity in a real-time environment right now, again driven by metrics, but understanding what's in the contract and how there's an opportunity. And in fact, a big part of the discussion yesterday was each individual as a general counsel, when they look at this and they say, as I approach a business problem, what are one of these three things I can do to impact? And the same from a chief procurement officer, when I look at this, not just about reducing costs on the procurement side, but what can I do if I drive the opportunity across the organization to reduce risk, to drive compliance with vendors, and or to increase the impact of the overall revenue inside the organization? Well, what has changed so dramatically? And Andrew, you hit it right on the head a few minutes ago when you were talking about the silos that occurred inside of your business. You see organizations that are only using contract management on the sales side, or they're only using contract management on the procurement side, right? We see many companies that only use contract management internally. These are non-revenue generating or non-cost savings potential opportunities, but the impact of the arrangements that they have with their clients are so important that they have to have contracts. And one very large entertainment company that is a customer of Selectica uses contract management at the ground level for unionized employees, and they also use those same contracts on the procurement side for buying tools for deliverable products that they have in the marketplace. So when you look at the organization, what's really changed is that this dynamic or this siloed approach has really moved to an integrated approach inside of the company. So from a procurement perspective, or a human resources standpoint, or from a legal perspective, it all needs to be brought together. And again, that's what Andrew was talking about when he talks about the consolidation of contract management. And again, we're hearing this in the marketplace as well, that each of these groups are coming together, and that's where ECLM really is derived from. If we talk about how we get there from both sides of the house, and again, if we take out anything that's not money related, so take out the human resources aspects or potentially the M&A contracts that are out there, and we look at the core of enterprise contract lifecycle management, it really is the sales and the procurement model, and those two coming together. And what is the impact that it has if I'm buying products that will be resold into a customer contract? But if you look at how the lack of enterprise CLM prevents synergies in many areas, right? The repository, it's hard to tie them together. The data that's in those contracts is hard to tie together. What terms and conditions that might be in place that prevent you or hold you back from gaining larger discounts or larger opportunities revenue-wise? So again, if you look at the outcomes and you look at the whole concept around traditional problem with contract lifecycle management, it really is the silos in the workflow, it's the data, and it's this decision-making that occurs around this. So really understanding that these two are separate, but they're together, and bringing the organizations together. Now, whether you're the chief purchasing officer or VP of procurement or whomever it might be, it's okay to walk across the hall and talk to the sales operations people, or it's okay to walk across the hall and talk to the general counsel about how can we leverage our information inside the organization to have a grander approach to contract management and pull these silos together. From a vision perspective, where are we trying to go? Well, again, I think if we look at it from each side of the organization and pulling this together, and again, playing off of what Andrew had said earlier, if you look at it from an existing integration of strategic supply management and how does that operationalize the buy side, and what are these potential integration aspects that are there, right? How do you actually do it? And we'll talk a little bit later about bringing these together, but it really starts with process and really the alignment of the two sides of the organization and linking together or grouping these dependent commitments from one side to the other. So understanding that if I'm buying products, if I'm buying raw materials that are going to go into a product that I'm going to sell, what do those commitments mean? And in fact, if I can take advantage of cost savings on those commitments, does that mean there's a greater opportunity on the sell side with those contracts to be able to reduce the cost or increase my opportunity for profitability, right? Bringing these things together from a commitment perspective, understanding what we're buying, and looking at the contract linkage, right? Is there alignment from one side of the house to the other? And is there a balance of trade from one side to the other? Because it might be that I've set a price that I'm going to sell this product at from a contract perspective on the sales and marketing side, but yet my costs have gone up so high on the procurement side that there's a huge impact. In fact, there's a recent case study in the marketplace right now, a number of recent research articles that were written around a large retail chain where literally the chief procurement officer, the chief financial officer was let go because of the organization where he forecasted a commitment on the revenue side, but in fact because of the cost of a line item that was changed in a contract, they literally missed their budget number by $1 billion. Right? Now that's granted a very large, exaggerated example, but it's a true example of what can happen every day with every contract inside of an organization. So it's important that you start with a vision and you start with process inside of your organization around ECLM. So again, let's talk about how do we break these silos and what's happening inside of the procurement world, right? There was a survey that was done recently by the Global Sourcing and Vendor Management Priorities through Forrester that they, and some research that's out there you can find, in your Forrester database. When they started looking at the integration of point solutions, a very small number are currently using these two or bringing them together, right? If you look at the questions, though, how many think that it would dramatically help, they could do the job better if they were integrated? Well, many think that there is. So again, it's that viewpoint or logic or understanding of what's changing in the marketplace that will drive this, and people are starting to migrate that way. Again, if we look at supplier risk and performance management, the same thing. What's the difference between what we think we should do and what we're currently doing? The gap is closing, but there's still quite a gap that's out there and from that perspective. Even across the further elements of this, and one of the things that we firmly believe at Selectica is that by bringing the IASTA organization together with Selectica, we were able to now focus on the spend against the contract. We're able to take the sales analytics, spend analytics tools and run them against contract lifecycle management as well as e-procurement. So this is very, very helpful data inside your organization to start asking these same questions as to where you should be or where you want to be as a company. If you start looking at the journey and how you get there, and we go back again to some of the things that Andrew mentioned, is that this really is an evolution or a journey, and it starts out with the basics. And many organizations, from a maturity perspective, either have file cabinets or they have repositories, which honestly are just easier to use file cabinets because you might be able to search on it, but you don't have the data inside of the contract that you can match up through your spend or tie to your sell-side contracts. So understanding this maturity model and plotting yourself where you are, right? So maybe get a repository in quickly. Understand the contract types, right? Look at across the organization and how are you using them. From a workflow standpoint, how can you start optimizing your contracts and building fulfillment tracking processes or e-signature across the organization, making it simpler. As we move up to compliance and control, now we're starting to look at the stuff inside of the contracts. Being able to make mass changes, mass clause changes, being able to make things more efficient in the organization and truly link obligations to commitment tracking, all the way up to truly having executive portals, cross-systems analytics, understanding how the commitments that are made from a spend standpoint tie back to a contract. One of the best examples I heard recently was from an organization that said they had a master agreement with the vendor. And underneath that, they had another 30 contracts that were tied to that master agreement. And when they got to $10 million in spend, there were significant discounts that were there. But because each of those contracts were tied, were separate from the master contract, they didn't know until 6 months later when they finally got the financials reporting, and having to go back and trying to recoup those discounts is nearly impossible. So as your organizations process and integrate through this maturity model, it's the value to business that impacts exponentially. So as you go forward, as you gain, as you become stronger and better at managing your contracts and managing this towards a enterprise perspective, the amount of opportunity savings, cost savings, and revenue and risk and compliance now matures and comes right along with that. Analytics is a key piece here, right? And as we look at leveraging analytics and business insights to give the organization the edge, you need to start reporting and start simple. And again, some of the things we talked about in this session that we were in yesterday, that was a mix of general counsel and procurement, is that there was an opportunity to start looking at what you have. Maybe start with just the types of contracts and separating and understanding how many contracts are sales side, how many contracts are buy side, how many are employee contracts, and then take it to the next level. How many of those buy side contracts are specific with vendors, and how many iterations are there, and how many other sub-documents are attached to those contracts, as well as on the sales side as well. And really then pulling that data together, being able to fully understand where we are as it relates to contract management. I'd like to take a second and talk about a quick case study that we've done here at Selectica. And Northlands is a very interesting firm, Canadian firm, of over 135-year-old not-for-profit company. And these colorful images here are really colorful images are really kind of cool, but it represents the community that they service and they develop in. Our client, Orion Scriver, who's a senior manager of procurement, is a true advocate and a change architect within his business. And he's really involved in the whole process around driving contract management inside of their company. And Orion was inside the company was able to literally take and build and acquire and implement processes and resources across the company and get on this journey of contract management with the end goal of creating an environment that puts their business in the best possible position to buy goods and services, to consistently predict, manage risk, and add value to achieve across their company. Right? They had several key pain points, though, that they had to deal with. Right? Those pain points were around procurement and contract inefficiencies, limited or inconsistent stakeholder engagement that allowed them not to collaborate, and there was ownership confusion on these contracts. And one of their major challenges was realizing the value and compliance in a decentralized organization where they really wanted centers of excellence. So what they're able to do with our ECM solution is transform this quasi-centralized purchasing environment into a strategic, center-led procurement environment with enterprise ECLM approach, right? And what Orion has told us is that inside of his organization, he's been able to increase visibility by over 10 times, with literally over 113 contracts in view to now over 1,100 contracts in view that strategically align both the procurement and the legal side and key sourcing across the organization. In their ongoing evolution, they've literally been able to increase users for ECLM. They've continued to leverage Selectica's out-of-the-box functionality to be able to drive these processes and expand their scope across the organization to include now sell-side agreements as well. And it's great to see them continue to use and these skills and build confidence inside of their organization. As far as another quick snapshot of our customers, many of these customers have seen very, very similar things. And we see these customers that we have up on the screen here now, that they've been able to work to enable an integration journey, right? Many of them have started, like Northlands, with just the buy side or just the sell side, and they moved to an enterprise potential of using technology across the organization. We've seen that at a number of different companies. AstraZeneca is a great example. Prudential is a great example of where they've grown inside of the organization. And Northlands, the case study, is the example. They've been moving through the maturity model and have been able to really drive true enterprise contract lifecycle management across the organization. So a couple of slides here I'd like to close on is that, first of all, from a technology standpoint, when you start to look at ECLM, first of all, think about it as a strategy, not as a technology, much like your counterparts on the sales and marketing side have looked at CRM as a strategy, not a technology. But when you start to look at technology as an organization, make sure that the tools match your processes and the landscape is configurable to allow you to get to where you want to be. I will caution you, however, if it's a bad process, fix the process first. I guarantee you Andrew will tell this, and other leading analysts will tell you that if it's a broken process, applying technology is still a broken process. But understanding what compliance opportunities are there and how can you tightly integrate them with your supply management capabilities, right? Use analytics very early on. As I mentioned, just look at the basics. How many are buy-side? How many are sell-side? What contracts are in an organization? And then take them a level down, applying analytics across the entire organization. As well as think to be innovative, right? How can you use the technology that's supplied out of the box and with some configuration from a technology vendor such as Selectica to be able to help you get to where you want to be from a contract management perspective. Final thoughts, ECLM is not an overnight phenomenon, right? It's been happening now for a number of years, just like ERP in the 80s and 90s and CRM in the 90s and 2000s. Now, as we move into the teens of the 2000s, we are understanding that this concept is following a very, very similar process. But it's not an overnight thing, but you need to start now. You need to start evaluating your existing environment, start understanding what you have from a contract perspective as it relates to buy-side or sell-side, and understanding who are the stakeholders. So look into your organization and initiate interaction. So whether you're the VP of procurement or a chief procurement officer or a general counsel or even the head of HR, right? If you're heavily involved in contracts, start having these conversations across the functional heads of your organization and get everybody on board to start driving towards an enterprise solution. Understand those top drivers that we talked about that can pull you towards an enterprise aspect of contract management. Understand that if you're all behind driving revenue, if you're all behind cost savings, and all behind managing risk and compliance, that you'll have immediate things to talk about inside the organization. And then lastly, champion the effort inside the organization. So whomever you are, again, from a CPO standpoint or a general counsel standpoint, anyone can take the ownership here. And typically, it'll rise to the top as to who really drives this process. But it's important that you start somewhere and that you start looking at it and start understanding where you are and where you want to be as far as the maturity life cycle goes. So we'll open it up for questions, but thank you very much, everybody, and Eric, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Patrick. That was outstanding, and I love the case study examples and the point about the ownership. So, folks, we are running a little hot on time. We're going to go ahead and move into the Q&A session. And like I said, any questions we can address, we will follow up either through email or any other means that you think is appropriate. But I'm going to go ahead and start with this first question, and it can go to either Andrew or Patrick. Which department is most likely to lead the CLM due diligence process and why? Just real briefly.
It's a good question. It depends upon who is feeling the biggest pain point. In many cases, we're seeing the general counsel leading this because they're trying to address the question of why are lawyers spending so much time in contract review. We've got bigger issues to do. In other cases, it may be the purchasing CPO who's saying, look, we need to really get contracts to management so we can take our sourcing in terms of contracts. Increasingly, we're finding the head of sales are doing it. So it's a complex question because you've got multiple stakeholders. But in general, the person who feels the greatest pain, the role who feels the greatest pain, will take the lead. And then other people will be part of the process. And it may actually, leadership may change as you move through the process. So if there's no single answer, but it tends to be most commonly the role that has the greatest pain will be the key driver.
Yeah, I would absolutely concur with what Andrew has to say, and you know, a lot of times we see the general counsel leading it because they're getting input from procurement or input from the sales side or input from the, you know, from the other C levels within the organization that somebody needs to help us get our arms around this. But right to Andrew's point, right? If you're a CPO or a VP of procurement that's driving most of the contracts right now, reach out across the functional groups. but make sure you get the general counsel involved because they're going to want to be involved as well. But he's absolutely right, and typically it is going to be the CPO or the general counsel that's driving this.
Okay, thank you. Here's another one. How do you change the mindset of executive leadership about the value and the risk around contracts?
Basically, it's reminding them of the importance of contracts to their business. If they don't get that, then forget it. You may have to look at another company, quite frankly. If your executives don't understand the importance of contracts to your business, then either you're a small business where, in fact, contracts are standard and you don't have a lot of control of them, or you've got leadership who simply doesn't understand all contracts. In either case, if you really are keen on contracts, you may want to go to another business, or you may decide this is not a problem we want to tackle in our firm. We don't have the audience for it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And again, from the standpoint of buy-in, I think once people realize, again, I'm going to go back to the analogies I had used from the ERP and CRM. People originally bought, Salesforce automation. That's all we need, which is basically contact management. And then they started to realize that marketing can't run separate from sales. It has to run together. And the same thing here, right? Procurement can't run on an island separate from the sales side of the organization. It needs to be brought together. So I think once people begin to realize that contracts truly do have a significant impact on the organization, that's when they really start to pull together to drive these processes inside the organization.
Okay. Here's maybe one or two more questions and we have to close because we're running a little bit long. But if we already have contract templates, do we just draw upon the content of the templates to create the library of terms and conditions?
That's a good question. It depends upon what's in the templates. I would say you want to go back to your legal department and say, do the templates that we have contain everything we want to do? But it may well be the answer is yes, in which case you say, okay, we'll break them down. However, what we're finding in many cases is that when there are templates, the legal department is having to make so many exceptions to those templates for the variety of contract needs they're having that the templates now become only used in 50, 60% of the time, and the rest is customization of templates. If that's the case, then you realize, okay, we've got to abandon the templates or at least work from them and create that much broader library of terms and conditions we'll need for those exception items that were templates have not worked before.
Yeah, I think templates are a great starting point of an organization, but make sure from a technology perspective that whoever you're working with is configurable because, again, even if it's a template for the retail industry and it has 80% of what you need, you have to be able to configure around that template for your processes and your understanding. Now, always follow best practices when you can, and sometimes best practices hurt because you're used to doing things a certain way. But the fact of the matter is, just doing it a certain way doesn't always the best way to do it. But if you can start with a template, you're going to save yourself time and money, and you're going to learn. But make sure, however, that whoever you're working with is able to configure the application to meet the needs of your specific organization.
Okay, and just one last question, and this is interesting from an ROI perspective, both on just the cost of a contract, but then again, there's deeper value in the contract. So the question is, any ballpark of how much companies are spending to create a contract? In other words, everything that goes into a contract, is there a general price for that?
Patrick, I'm going to pass that to you. I don't have any data specifically on that.
Can you repeat the question again? I'm not sure I fully understood it.
It's a total cost per contract of creation, I think.
Yeah, generally speaking, what's the cost to create a single contract?
Yeah, I think those dollars are hard to wrap your arms around. I think there's been a few studies in the industry where people have tried to apply it. But I will tell you, though, from an ROI perspective, in fact, I'll just go back to yesterday, just from a pure understanding what's in the contract and then applying the spend, for instance, against the contract, I have seen examples where organizations on one particular deal or one particular contract have literally paid for an entire contract management system because they now have a better understanding of what was committed, what was there, and what the cost savings were actually attributed to, and be able to capture those cost savings. Difficult to tie a number to the contract. Again, if you're manual, it's going to be more expensive, right? If you're automated, as far as the cost per contract goes, you can start to track that. From a manual standpoint, going to be very, very difficult to do that and get passed around. But if you start looking at efficiencies, being able to build a contract in a system, being able to do authoring, negotiation, changing, and passing it around inside the organization, just its speed alone will reduce the cost of that contract. But difficult to put a number on it. But certainly, if that question, if someone would like to follow up, Eric, we can certainly get some more detailed data on that for them.
Sounds good. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time and all the great content.